In the shadows between history's official pages, there are stories sealed behind steel doors and black ink, where no light is meant to reach. They are fragments of a war that never truly ended, buried orders, erased names, and weapons conceived in the fever of desperation. Every whisper leads deeper into a maze of forgotten crimes, where the air still tastes of fear, and the truth waits like a tripwire, untouched for decades, yet ready to detonate. On 26th of April 1945, 5 days before Hitler's suicide, and only hours after the last functioning airfields around Berlin fell to Soviet artillery, a Ju-3552 transport aircraft lifted off from Finsterwalde Air Base under the call sign Gustav Drei. Luftwaffe logs describe it simply as a supply run to Dresden. The reality, according to fragments recovered from post-war interrogations, was far more unusual. This was Operation Silberregen, a high-priority evacuation flight ordered directly by Reich Air Ministry staff. The plane's crew was minimal: Oberleutnant Helmut Kroger at the controls, Feldwebel Rudi Spengler as flight engineer, and 2 enlisted gunners. 3 additional passengers boarded without being recorded on the manifest. Witnesses later identified them as uniformed personnel wearing the collar tabs of the Technisches Amt, technical office, one carrying a sealed steel case handcuffed to his wrist. A 4th passenger, in civilian clothes, was seen by ground crew entering the rear hatch. His identity remains unknown. At 1742, the Ju-352 took off into low cloud and headed south, skirting Soviet-controlled areas. 40 minutes later, radar coverage from a Luftwaffe Würzburg Riese installation at Chemnitz lost contact. Officially, the aircraft was presumed destroyed by Soviet anti-aircraft fire. However, intercepted Enigma traffic decrypted at Bletchley Park, classified until 1983, mentions successful diversion and ground receipt confirmed in the vicinity of the Ore Mountains, near the Sudetenland border. Post-war US Army G2 records reveal that the 3rd Battalion, 2nd Infantry Regiment, advancing east from Plauen, received intelligence from Czech partisans of an iron crate being transported by horse-drawn cart to a remote farmstead outside Kraslice. The informant, codenamed Mistral, described the crate as approximately 1.2 meters long, heavily riveted and bearing stenciled markings, Project Sonnenglas. Within days, the region fell under Soviet control, and no further Allied reconnaissance was possible. Soviet archives, partially opened after 1991, mention a priority recovery by the 4th Guards Rifle Division on 2nd May 1945 in the same area. The object, described vaguely as aeronautical components and optical material, was allegedly sent to the Scientific Research Institute No. 88 near Kaliningrad. Researchers have noted that NII-88 later became a key site for Soviet missile and satellite development. A surviving Luftwaffe mechanic from Finsterwalde, interviewed in 1967 under West German counterintelligence protection, claimed the crate contained not physical weapons, but microfilm reels, hundreds of them, documenting advanced propulsion experiments carried out at Peenemünde and underground facilities in Lower Silesia. He insisted the contents were so valuable that Reich officials ordered the transport to avoid both American and Soviet capture, even if it meant destroying the aircraft. Yet no wreckage was ever found. A 1974 aerial survey by East German border guards identified an unregistered structure on a hillside near Jindřichovice. Then, in restricted borderland territory, the building resembled a small agricultural barn, but thermal imaging showed unusually cold interior readings, consistent with thick metal insulation. Requests to inspect the site were denied by Czechoslovak state security, citing ongoing industrial use. In 1995, Czech historian Pavel Němec obtained a copy of a 1949 Ministry of Interior inventory, listing steel vault, locked, contents unexamined, seized from a farmstead matching the coordinates of the suspected landing, Suita. The inventory bears a redacted annotation. Transferred per Soviet liaison request, 12th November 1949. The trail ends there. What remains undisputed is that no other record of Operation Silberregen appears in Luftwaffe archives, suggesting deliberate post-war purging. The surviving fragments, Enigma decrypts, partisan testimony, and Soviet logistics notes present a picture of a mission whose purpose was to move a cache of research beyond the reach of both Allied victory and historical record. Whether the U-352 landed on a makeshift strip in the mountains or its cargo was transferred mid-route to another vehicle, the absence of debris, human remains, or confirmed burial sites leaves only one conclusion among certain military historians: the aircraft never crashed at all. Today, Kraslice and its surrounding valleys are quiet, the remnants of war scattered in rusted steel and forgotten trenches. But locals still speak of an unmarked barn that stood for decades, locked and silent, until one night in the late 1940s when a convoy of Soviet trucks arrived, stayed for hours, and departed under armed escort. The next day, the barn was gone, burned to its foundation. Beneath the ash, they say, lay scorched rivets and fragments of metal with serial numbers no one in the village had ever seen before. On the night of 3rd of February 1947, a formation of 6 Liberty-class cargo ships departed Pier 90 in New York Harbor under escort of the destroyer USS Aylwin, DD-355. The mission was not announced in any Allied naval bulletins. Designated Blackfriar, Convoy 6WWII, it appeared only in a handful of routing orders stamped Eyes Only, Combined Chiefs of Staff. Officially, the ships were bound for Antwerp carrying surplus industrial equipment for post-war reconstruction. Privately, the manifests were sealed under Section X-12, a classification usually reserved for nuclear materials and code-breaking devices. Surviving dockworkers recalled the peculiar loading process. Unmarked wooden crates, roughly the size of small automobiles, lifted aboard by civilian stevedores, but overseen by armed officers wearing no insignia. An observer from the Port Authority noted the presence of OSS veterans, men who had been spotted during wartime cargo operations for Operation Paperclip. According to the witness, the crates were marked with only a single stenciled emblem, a black cross within a circle. Weather reports described the North Atlantic that week as brutal. Gale force winds, poor visibility, and swells exceeding 20 feet. At 02:17 on 7th of February, the convoy's last confirmed position was logged by the British coastal station at Stornoway, Outer Hebrides. At that point, all 6 ships were maintaining radio silence, as per operational orders. No further communications were ever received. The US Navy's post-incident investigation, codenamed Board Inquiry 94, concluded that the convoy was lost with all hands due to extreme weather. Yet no wreckage, oil slick, or lifeboats were ever recovered, an absence that puzzled seasoned Atlantic salvage officers. Complicating matters, classified Admiralty memos from February 1947, declassified in 2003, describe unidentified surface contacts in the convoy's vicinity. One memo from Rear Admiral Basil Brooke to First Sea Lord John Cunningham refers to 2 radar returns maintaining constant parallel course at 18 knots, bearing no friendly IFF response. Canadian archives hold an even stranger clue. A Royal Canadian Air Force PBY Catalina patrol aircraft, operating out of Reykjavik, filed an uncirculated report on 8th of February. The pilot recorded visual contact with 3 vessels running without lights in heavy seas, one of which was significantly smaller and darker than the Liberty-class profile. The vessels altered course northward toward the Denmark Strait upon detection. The sighting coordinates placed them within 50 nautical miles of Blackfriar Convoy's projected route. By 1948, any official discussion of the incident ceased. The names of all 6 Liberty ships were quietly removed from active service records. Families of the lost crew were issued death certificates citing marine casualty, classified circumstances. None received traditional war grave status. A partial breakthrough came in 1979 when a retired US Navy radio man in Florida, William P. Gannon, told a local journalist that he had intercepted a brief distress transmission on 8294 kHz the night of 7th of February 1947. The signal, heavily garbled, allegedly contained the phrase "boarding underway." Gannon's original logbook disappeared from his home a week after the interview. Maritime historians have noted the timing of the convoy, less than 6 months after the British-led Operation Surgeon, and only weeks before the Soviet Union's first nuclear research breakthroughs became evident to Western intelligence. Some theorize the convoy carried dismantled German research apparatus intended for secure relocation to Europe under NATO precursor agreements. Others suspect the cargo was never meant to reach Antwerp at all, but rather served as bait for an intelligence operation against Soviet naval assets. The most persistent rumor comes from an anonymous source within the Bundesmarine archives, who claims a file marked Blackfriar Elbe contains post-war interrogations of Kriegsmarine officers who, under Soviet custody, described late-war U-boat prototypes capable of extended submerged operations, vessels never formally documented in German shipyards. Whether these vessels, or something like them, could have been responsible for intercepting the convoy remains speculation. Today, the coordinates of the convoy's last known location mark nothing but open sea. Annual sonar sweeps by independent expeditions have found no trace of Liberty-class hulls. It is as if the 6 ships, their cargo and their crews were erased from the Atlantic overnight, leaving behind only sealed files and unanswered transmissions in a frequency log that should never have existed. In December 1951, at the height of the Korean War, a Soviet aircraft mechanic named Mikhail Semyonovich Kravtsov approached the US military liaison mission in Vienna. He claimed to have worked at a classified installation near Gorky on a project known internally as Uzor 5 Bas. His testimony suggested the device was not Soviet in origin, but adapted from German research recovered in 1945. An airborne radar weapon capable of flooding an enemy's avionics with false signals and rendering aircraft uncontrollable without firing a single shot. Under the codename Operation Silver Torch, Kravtsov was exfiltrated to Naples aboard a US Air Force C-47. CIA handling officer Walter H. Brenner classified the initial debrief as exceptional intelligence, immediate technical assessment required. The defector described a mobile array mounted on modified ZIS-151 trucks, operating on a frequency range previously unused in known Allied radar systems. When pressed, he produced a hand-drawn schematic of a parabolic emitter nearly identical to experimental designs abandoned at the Luftwaffe's Rechlin test center in early 1945. For 3 months, Kravtsov was moved between safe houses in Italy and West Germany. A March 1952 memorandum from the US Army Security Agency confirms his presence at Camp King in Oberursel, a facility known for housing high-value Eastern Bloc defectors. There, he reportedly identified several former Peenemünde engineers working under assumed identities for Soviet military contractors. Then, without formal record, Kravtsov disappeared. The last confirmed sighting comes from a declassified April 1953 CIA field report. An informant, codenamed Harrow, claimed to have seen Kravtsov boarding a train from Wiesbaden to Hamburg in the company of 2 unknown men in civilian clothes. Both were described as speaking German with a Baltic accent. Days later, West German, Bundesnachrichtendienst, BND. Surveillance logs noted increased foreign interest in Camp King personnel, particularly those linked to radar countermeasure studies. KGB defectors in the late 1970s hinted that Kravtsov had been recaptured during a covert extraction and returned to the USSR via East Germany. Yet no Soviet prison or trial record has ever been found. Instead, a single entry in the archives of the Ministry of Medium Machine Building, responsible for nuclear and advanced weapons research, lists consultant MS Kravtsov as assigned to Special Project Dnipro in 1955. The nature of that project remains classified. Technical files from the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology, partially released in 2009, contain evaluations of a non-lethal aerial interdiction system that closely matches Kravtsov's description. One diagram, dated 1954, shows a radar dish mounted on a semi-trailer, accompanied by notes in both English and German. The annotation, Field Trial, Murmansk Air Corridor, Jan 54, suggests the system may have been tested far from any Korean theater. Anecdotal accounts from civilian pilots flying the North Atlantic in the mid-1950s report mysterious episodes of instrument failure in clear weather. Most were dismissed as magnetic interference. Yet an unclassified US Air Force accident report from 1956 describes the sudden loss of navigational control aboard a C-54 Skymaster over the Greenland-Iceland Gap. The crew regained control only after descending below 2,000 feet. The incident's technical appendix, still redacted, refers to probable intentional RF event. Whether Kravtsov willingly collaborated with his handlers, was forcibly repatriated, or simply eliminated, remains uncertain. His original hand-drawn schematics have not surfaced in any known public archive. What is known is that, by 1957, both NATO and Warsaw Pact forces were experimenting with airborne electronic countermeasures remarkably similar in function to what Kravtsov had described. The strongest remaining clue lies in a requisition log from the US Signal Corps stamped March 1953 for 6 high-frequency field generators, German pattern. The shipment's destination is listed as APO 09777, a code later linked to a US Air Force facility in Keflavik, Iceland, squarely within range of the Murmansk flight path. No grave, no photographs, no recorded death certificate for Mikhail Semyonovich Kravtsov exist in any national registry. His last known words, according to a CIA interrogation transcript, were spoken in heavily accented German. "It is not new. It was never ours. We only copied the work of ghosts." On 8 April 1945, as Königsberg fell under relentless Soviet artillery, elements of the 43rd Army's 260th Rifle Division advanced toward the shattered remains of Königsberg Castle. Amid collapsing walls and burning archives, Red Army sappers discovered a sealed sub-basement blocked by a reinforced steel hatch. The door bore the insignia of the Ahnenerbe, Heinrich Himmler's research division, and a triple lightning rune insignia unfamiliar to the soldiers. NKVD security officers immediately cordoned the site, removing the regular army from the area. The vault contained 46 wooden crates, each marked with stenciled numbers and labeled Phonographische Sammlung. Inside were wax phonograph cylinders, carefully packed in straw and wrapped in oiled cloth. Inventory sheets, written in Gothic script, listed the contents as experimental linguistic field recordings from occupied Eastern territories. Yet accompanying notebooks, partially water-damaged, contained equations, waveforms, and references to Project Nachtwelle, literally night wave. Soviet technical officers from the Scientific Research Institute for Communications, NII-25, were dispatched to Königsberg within days. According to a declassified 1961 GRU training manual, the cylinders were to be treated as controlled material under Directive 34B, a classification used for recovered enemy scientific apparatus. One internal memo, released after 1991, describes the recordings as sustained low-frequency harmonic emissions superimposed on vocal patterns. Eyewitness accounts from soldiers present at the initial discovery claim that the cylinders, when briefly played on a hand-cranked phonograph, produced an unsettling vibration in the floor and walls, despite the machine's small size. The sound, a mix of deep hum and human chanting, caused one soldier to vomit and another to faint. NKVD guards confiscated the phonograph and forbade further playback. By late April 1945, the crates were shipped by rail to Moscow under heavy guard. Officially, their destination was the State Archive of Sound Recordings. Unofficially, they were redirected to an NKVD technical facility in Lubyanka, then later to the closed city of Chelyabinsk 70. There, researchers allegedly attempted to reproduce the acoustic effect using magnetic tape. No Soviet public record mentions Nachtwelle after 1948. However, a 1952 KGB internal newsletter, obtained by West German intelligence, refers to a discontinued program of psychological interference through resonant harmonic induction. The file notes failure to achieve field reliability and danger to operators. Western awareness of the find emerged in 1967 when British SIS intercepted a Warsaw Pact technical shipment manifest listing archival phonographic media, experimental, among items bound for a secure site in Latvia. Analysts cross-referenced the description with wartime German projects and concluded the recordings might be related to Ahnenerbe ethnographic expeditions, though the true purpose remains speculative. In 1993, a former Soviet acoustics engineer, Yevgeny Kharitonov, gave an interview to a Moscow newspaper claiming to have handled one of the Königsberg cylinders in the early 1950s. He described it as containing layered tones designed to interfere with human equilibrium and induce disorientation. Kharitonov alleged the technique was derived from field experiments conducted by the SS in occupied Poland, where crowd pacification trials were rumored to have occurred. No documentation of such trials has been found. The location of the WWII cylinders today is unknown. Some researchers believe they were destroyed in a laboratory fire at Chelyabinsk 70 in 1955. Others suspect they were transferred to an underground archive in the KGB's Yasenevo headquarters and remain sealed. A small but persistent theory holds that at least one cylinder was taken by a Soviet officer as a personal war trophy and may still be in private hands. The only surviving German reference to Project Nachtwelle appears in a fragmented letter from an SS Sturmbannführer dated January 1945, addressed to the Reich Main Security Office. It reads, "The resonance is promising. Further trials on the eastern subjects confirm its potency in open terrain. Transmission over greater distance remains unstable." Königsberg Castle was completely demolished by Soviet authorities in the late 1960s. The original vault no longer exists. The coordinates noted in the 1945 Sapper log now mark a paved square in modern Kaliningrad. Beneath it, if any fragments remain, they are sealed under decades of concrete, mute evidence of a weapon that was never officially acknowledged and may have been too dangerous to perfect. In January 1962, a joint archaeological mission sponsored by the French National Centre for Scientific Research and the University of Bonn began excavations at a remote Roman settlement site near Tataouine, southern Tunisia. 4 weeks into the dig, shifting sands revealed a curved, riveted steel structure buried beneath nearly 4 meters of sediment. Within days, it became clear the find was no ancient ruin. It was the corroding hull of a German U-boat. The discovery baffled the team. The site lay over 200 kilometers from the Mediterranean coast, in an area untouched by navigable rivers. Stenciled inside the conning tower were the words "Schattenmeer a fall" in faded Gothic script. No such vessel appeared in Kriegsmarine records, wartime logs, or post-war Allied intelligence summaries. French Army engineers dispatched from Bizerte confirmed the hull's dimensions matched the Type WWII series. Advanced submarines constructed late in the war, many incomplete by May 1945. However, structural anomalies were noted, reinforced shielding around the forward section, and what appeared to be a lead-lined compartment aft of the control room. Samples taken from the shielding were later identified as early nuclear-grade lead-antimony alloy, an unusual choice for any wartime U-boat. Within 48 hours, the Tunisian government, under heavy French military influence at the time, ordered the site sealed. Locals reported that a convoy of French military trucks arrived at night, their headlights covered, and worked until dawn. By morning, the excavation was filled in and guarded by soldiers. All photographs taken by the dig team were confiscated. Negatives were never returned. Unofficial accounts from 2 German members of the archaeological crew, later interviewed in Bonn, claimed they were told by French officers that the vessel was a chemical transport prototype abandoned after a desert weapons test in 1943. This explanation is inconsistent with both the Type WWII's hull design and the absence of any recorded German desert naval operations. In 1971, A classified Bundesmarine intelligence memo, later leaked in the 1990s, referenced the Tunisian incident as a potential lead in tracing lost displacement assets from the Kriegsmarine's Seawolf program. Historians familiar with the memo believe Seawolf was a late-war plan to deploy modified submarines for unconventional missions, possibly involving nuclear materials or experimental propulsion systems. If true, it could explain the extensive radiation shielding. A further anomaly emerged in 2004, when a declassified CIA document mentioned possible Axis atomic material dispersal via North African overland convoy, April 1945. The report speculated that certain cargoes, unable to reach ports due to Allied control of the Mediterranean, were transported inland for burial or retrieval at a later date. The existence of a submarine so far from the sea could suggest an intentional dismantling and overland relocation, though no logistical records confirm such an operation. Satellite imagery taken in 1963 by a US Corona reconnaissance satellite shows a large, covered structure at the coordinates provided by the original dig team, visible for only one mission cycle before vanishing in subsequent passes. Whether this was a protective shelter or a staging area for removal remains unclear. By the late 1980s, desert erosion had exposed part of the submarine's hull again. A French military detachment reportedly conducted a second operation to rebury it, this time using bulldozers to collapse surrounding dunes. Tunisian locals speak of a metal tomb in the desert, but no official acknowledgement has been made by either France or Tunisia. Theories range from a secret Axis overland transport of fissile material to an aborted German-Vichy collaboration involving experimental desalination reactors intended for North African outposts. The reinforced shielding, however, suggests protection from internal radiation rather than external heat, a fact that has kept the nuclear transport theory alive among military historians. Today, the exact location of Schattenmeer 4 is unknown to the public. Independent expeditions in the Tatooine region have failed to rediscover the site, though several claim to have found rusted steel fragments bearing German manufacturing stamps from the late 1940s, dates that should be impossible if the vessel was lost during the war. Whether buried intact or dismantled under cover of desert night, the submarine remains one of the strangest wartime anomalies ever recorded, a relic that should not exist where it was found. Some secrets die in the ground. Others, no matter how deep you bury them, keep breathing, pressing against the soil, straining for the surface. You can burn the records, silence the witnesses, erase the maps, but the weight of what was done remains. And when it rises, it carries the stench of war. Not the kind fought in daylight, but the kind no one dares to admit ever happened.